Welcome back to the channel. Something a bit different today. I've got a diesel Zafira in and it's got a problem. The guy does short journeys in it, and sometimes he'll come back to it and the battery's flat. So he had a new battery about 18 months ago, and then he's had another battery in the last few weeks and it hasn't fixed the problem. So it's quite a nice low mileage Zafira for the age. It's about 12 years old, but it's not done many miles, about 50,000 miles. So I keep getting problems like this into my workshop, and I thought it would be interesting to make a video about my diagnostics process. Okay, so here's the car. It's a 1.7 diesel. This is a Circle L engine. It runs very nicely. It all looks very standard, unmolested. Yeah, as I say, it's a 2012 model year, so it's just over 10 years old. It's got a brand new battery on it. Now, I'm not particularly a big fan of these, but I happen to not suspect that's the issue. So, as I say, the customer, he does lots of short journeys, and quite often he'll do a day's work and come back to it, and you have to jump start it off another car. So I've got the battery tester on here, and as you can see, it says it's a good battery, but it does need charging up. State of health is fine. Now, I do find that these cheaper batteries will quite often pass this test, and the reserve capacity, that's the sort of low current for a long time capacity, i.e. perhaps you've left your lights on, of these cheaper batteries seems to be lower. So they'll start your car fine once or twice, but if you leave your lights on for a while, they won't. And I see it says it needs recharging. I will charge that up, but the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do some tests on the alternator as it stands now. So I'm going to get my multimeter. So the Fluke I like, it's got a really big display and it is very accurate, and this is about 75% state of charge. So let's start it up and see what happens. Well, that's a bit disappointing, isn't it? Not very much at the moment. It does seem to be charging a bit. It's 13.8, so it's the alternator's outputting some voltage, but not enough. Let's have a look again at that voltage drop. Yeah, sort of 120 millivolt. Well, let's give it some load. So I'm going to put the lights on for this. Yeah, so again we've got 120 millivolt drop. Ideally you'd see nothing. Yeah, and 13.6. I mean, that probably would charge a battery, or at least stop it from going flat, but it certainly wouldn't charge it up. You know, generally you expect to see over 14 volts charging. I know some cars are a little bit low, but this is a standard alternator. So I can see the alternator is not doing very much. It might be a bad alternator. Also might be a bad connection from the alternator. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to charge this battery up fully, and I'm going to test the battery again, just to be thorough, and then I'm also going to do a parasitic draw test. So I want to get a complete picture of everything that's going on in this car before I start. So I've got, I know where I am. So the battery charge has done its analysis and it reckons we're about charged, and what's interesting is it says it's keeping it at 13.6 volts as fully charged. This is its float charge, so it's where it will keep it charged but not charge it up and not let it deplete. And that's about the voltage that the alternator was outputting. So by my logic, that means that it would barely charge, if at all, the battery, if the battery's getting 13.6 volts from the alternator. The other thing is we've got 12.6 amp hours. Now it's a 68 amp hour battery from memory, and 20% of that is 13.6 amp hours, so it's about right. It's charged, if it was at around 80%, 70 to 80%. It should be about 100% now. So what that's telling me is that the rated capacity of the battery is about right. It hasn't lost any amp hours. So the battery's still being charged. It's got 13.6 volts of power feeding it, well, not charging it, keeping it charged up. And I thought I'd do a parasitic draw test, and this is the equipment I use. I use the snap-on parasitic draw tester and this Curian Neuron Bluetooth multimeter, and it gives me a live current reading. So at the moment I've got a test load just to simulate a parasitic draw. I'm not actually connected to the car at the moment, just using the battery, and it's just reading a sort of, that's just a false reading. If I turn this off, this was now diverting the current through the multimeter, and you see we're getting a 47 milliamp load across the multimeter, and this, it says on it should draw 50 milliamps, so this is reading correctly. So the good thing about this parasitic draw tester is I can do a parasitic draw test, I can see the live current reading, but it's got protection fuses that mean I don't have to disconnect the battery to do that parasitic draw test. So I'm going to reconfigure it and have it in parasitic draw test mode. And to do that I've tricked it into thinking the bonnet's shut. I've locked all the doors are all shut. So I'm just going to make sure that there's nothing pulling this battery back down that means that it will be hard for the alternator to charge it back up again, because we know the alternator's not charging it particularly fast, if at all, but I want to make sure that there's nothing horrible pulling it back down again. So, you know, like a light being stuck on. But I thought before I did the parasitic draw test I should redo the battery test, because it said last time to recharge before it could give an accurate reading. It's now saying good battery, and it's pegged the state of health, which is what we should expect. And I also think that this amp hour rating is roughly correct. Maybe it's a little bit optimistic, but judging by how much energy it took to get from sort of 80 to roughly 100%, it's broadly correct with this. So I don't think this battery has got a capacity issue or an output issue, because this tests the conductivity, this tests the cranking amps, it doesn't test the capacity, but it's past the cranking amps, and my very rough test of capacity means it's got the capacity, the 68 amp hours it's saying. So I think we can pretty much eliminate the battery as being at fault. So we've now got this set up for parasitic draw. We've got the leads going into the amperage section of the multimeter. I've got one lead of the snap-on kit on the ground terminal to the car, and one to the ground terminal of the battery. So I've done this without disconnecting it. I've just slid it in. Did that off camera because that would have been awkward. Have a little look now, and let's run it. So anything less than 50 is a pass, really. 30's a little high, but yeah, look, it's going up there, 650. It's quite a large parasitic draw, that. See if it comes back down. I mean, it might have just woken up to do something back then. I don't know that. Because obviously the car modern car like this, it's got lots of systems that will be doing stuff in the background, you know, checking to see whether the doors are locked and stuff. Okay, so I've left this for a while, and it just seems to be stuck in this waveform. It drops down to 32, and it goes up to 125, and it drops down to 32. So I think the alarm system is looking for something, personally. Yeah, that's just a guess. But I worked out, even at 125 milliamp, the battery should lose 10% of its capacity in 2 days. So I don't think that's this bloke's problem, and it's not at 120 the whole time. So he's talking about kind of 4 hours it goes flat, not days. So I think what's actually happening is that basically when you start the car, it uses a bit of energy, and the battery might just about have enough energy to start the car once. Starts the car, runs the glow plugs for a bit, doesn't actually charge up anymore, and then you'll stop and do something, and then you know, the car's using power. Look, it's woken up to do something now. It would have depleted from the starting the first time. Then he leaves it for a bit, cools down. Engine's a little bit harder to restart, and then it won't restart the second time. So I don't think it's more a case of being of parasitic draw, although, you know, this is quite high. I think it's a case of it not really fully recharging because of the charge voltage. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in the air and actually see whether we can get a reading straight off the alternator. Okay, we're now underneath the car, and I've hooked up the multimeter directly onto the stud, which will come out the regulator rectifier in the alternator. So this stud here is exactly where the power is coming out. Now, alternators will regulate their voltage to 14-ish volts, 14.5 normally, and they do that by sensing the voltage at the alternator. So I've got the positive on there, and I've got the negative on the engine. So this is what the alternator's seeing volt-wise. What's really interesting here is, look, it's putting out 14.3 volts, which is what I'd expect it to be putting out. But at the battery, we weren't seeing anything like that. I've literally just moved the car down on the ramp, and look, I'm getting 14.2 volts here, and the lights are off. Put the full beam on. So look, 13.99, 14 volts. And whilst that will charge a battery, it's not going to do a fast charge the same way as 14.4 would. So I'm not touching anything, I'm just going to put the car up in the air and make that measurement again. Okay, we've got the lights on, we've got the full beam on, so we've got a fair amount of hundreds of watts of load on this alternator now. And it's still putting out exactly the same voltage, so it's putting out 14.3 volts, which is what it was doing unloaded with all the lights off. But at the car, the battery in, we're only seeing 14 volts, so 300 millivolts, 0.3 of a volt, is getting lost. This is the voltage at the alternator, and this is the battery, so you can see they're reading the same thing. So let's start it up. No trouble starting there. We're not charging just yet, so we're up to 14.3 at the alternator and only 13.7 at the car, so there's still something wrong here. I've got to find where this voltage is going. So again, I'm going to, yeah, there's 300 voltage going missing somewhere. So let's have a look again. Not really anything there now. That's good. Want to see where that voltage drop is. Yeah, I don't think that's the problem, the ground. I mean, in an ideal world, you'd see exactly the same voltage at the battery as you would at the alternator. There's nothing across there. I wonder if it's the positive lead itself that's faulty then. And that might not seem like much, but that's the difference between it charging and it not charging. Yeah, so there we have it, look. You've got this end's connected straight to the alternator, and this end to the battery, and we're losing 268 millivolts. Now look at that, 268 millivolts, and that really, in my mind, is the difference between success and failure. So somewhere along that positive lead, it's losing power. So the next thing to do is to do a volt drop between the alternator and the starter motor. See whether it's losing voltage there. Still got 260 millivolt here. Just realised this is actually the fuse box feed. That is the feed to the starter and alternator. Okay, so I got the flare out. It's a bit old. You have to keep it plugged in now, but so it's still got fairly high current drop. And look at that. High impedance connection at the battery terminal. Because look at the other one. They're both carrying the same amount of current. They would have to be. And that one is yeah, slightly warm, but look, this one is hot at the connector. Look, it's 40 degrees. And you see, the rest of the wire is warm, but it's not hot. So there we have it. There's the fault. If you've been an Opel Vauxhall expert watching this video up until this point, you probably have now been shouting at the screen going, Peter, it's that crimped connection. So I did a Google search for the part, and there's loads of forum posts about this. Maybe I should have Googled it first time, but my point of this video is to explain the tests you can do, and this would apply to any car with any fault. The fact is, this is a common fault. It would have made a rather boring video watching me Google for 5 minutes the problem. So, turns out that you have to buy the whole engine wiring loom. It's about £200, and there's not any stock available at the moment. So, I've added an additional wire from here, quite thick wire, straight to the alternator. So this is in parallel with the old connection. Is it ideal? No, but it's an additional thing, so it should bring the resistance overall of the circuit from alternator to battery down. Now that connection is fine to start the car because it's just a momentary thing, but over time it gets hot, and the starter motor won't care about a 300 milliamp or even a volt or even 2 volt drop. It'll just turn the engine over. Obviously eventually it will get to the point where the voltage is so low it won't start, but the alternator is very sensitive. It needs to be able to sense the voltage there. So let's have a go at starting it up. See what happens. There we go, 14.2. So we got dipped and main beam on, and we're still at 14.2 volts. So that should now be enough to charge it. Yes, there probably is a voltage drop elsewhere in this loom. Yeah, so we got dip beam, got a fan on, side lights on, 14.2 volts at the battery. Fairly happy with that. See the current drop across. Yes, 0.05, 45 millivolts there. So again, the ground isn't particularly great on this as well. I think this is just generally quite a poor wiring arrangement, but it's better than it was. I'm going to tidy up this wiring now and let the customer know that it needs a new loom. So hopefully that's fixed for the customer. I'm going to advise him he needs a new loom. Yeah, if you have one of these Vauxhall Opel 1.7 diesels and you're getting the battery go flat, that's the thing to check. I think there are other videos on YouTube about it, but hopefully this video gives you an idea of the process you need to go through to work out why a battery's not charging. We've checked the battery itself, we've checked whether it's holding reserve capacity, we've checked for parasitic draw. There is some, but not enough to make it go flat in the time the customer said. And we've checked the alternator output, which is fine. So that only leaves the wiring, and I've managed to determine that it's not the last half of the wiring, it's actually the first half of the wiring that's faulty. And with the thermal camera, I could see it was that crimped connection at the battery terminal. So, all in all, quite successful. So thanks for watching.